So kindly I request you to stand up. We welcome our speaker today. Let's join our hands together. We are grateful. Thank you for coming. Thank you for accepting to come.
Thank you very much. Please, you may take your seats. I think all the work has already been done. My job is to just wind it up. Allow me to introduce my wife. Monica will be 33 years married in December. Monica is the Dean of the School of Journalism, Media Studies at Uganda Christian University. And our firstborn son has requested to accompany us, and he's here. He got married end of last year, so also December he will make 1 year in marriage. He's a man with his own home and he works. He's called Benezeri. Ebenezer, that's where the Lord has brought us. I'm privileged to be here this evening. Thank you for inviting me, Pastor Martin and Dr. Bonita. I have heard a lot about this fellowship. In fact, I had been invited earlier, but it had not been possible for me to come. God's timing is best, so I'm glad to be here with seeing many, many familiar faces. Apostle Batambuze, thank you for being here. And as you already mentioned, you've been with me and your colleagues. I am so privileged that when I became Director of Public Prosecutions, Pastor Batambuze, Pastor Bishop Ruere, Pastor Deo Musoke, about 10 pastors every week were coming to pray for me. And I can assure you that's the only way I got out of that office alive in one piece. And even when I moved where I am, they still came. They agreed to come, and every Wednesday at 10, we are at that altar. Before that, I did not know much about altars. So thank you very much, Pastor Batambuze, and your colleagues. Talking about Joseph, allow me to just take you briefly through where I have worked. I'm like a nomad. I've worked in very many places. So I joined the Attorney General's Chambers, being a lawyer from Law Development Center. My first port of entry was Attorney General's Chambers as a state attorney. And my strategy was to go work there for 2 years, and then I go in private practice and be like all those big lawyers in town, make a lot of money, and live the good life. But when you surrender to God, I had already given my life to Christ. When I was in senior one in Budo, I actually fellowshipped with the Bazook Fellowship. For all those years, I was in Budo 6 years. I was brought up by the tatas and mamas and the aunties. And I thank God very, very much for that grounding. So I already knew the Lord when I came, but I wanted to tell the Lord that this is my chosen place, private practice, and to make a lot of money was my motive. I cannot shy away from that. That's really what I wanted. Coming from a poor background and so on, I thought it was my time. Yeah, make money, big thing, yeah. But into that Attorney General's Chambers, I had to leave again. My wife had got a scholarship to go and study in the US, and my church said, you have to go in hot pursuit and get married. You cannot later. So I left, and while I was away, I got information that I had been cut off from the payroll because I had gone without proper leave, yes. So, but when I came back, again, honoring authority, I went to my Solicitor General, who was a professional head, now Mr. Kabatsi, Peter Kabatsi, and I told him, you know, I've gone to study and I had wanted to come back, but public service has said since I went away illegally, I've been scrapped from the payroll, so I just came to bid you farewell. And he said, but who can get rid of my officer without my knowledge? He said, you go and sit and work. I will sort all that one out. And so I stayed in government. And I found favor with the Solicitor General, and I stayed. And the 2 years happened, but I could not leave. I think God made it very difficult for me to leave. My plans, he enlarged and changed my vision. So much so that during that time, I did very many things. My nomadism started. Jennifer here knows that we worked together at the Electoral Commission. I was seconded to the Electoral Commission, and I worked there for some time. And as soon as I came back, they made me a personal assistant to the Attorney General. So it was becoming increasingly difficult to leave because I was getting embroiled in the, in the key positions in the office. And one of the people I was Attorney General to, I mean personal assistant to, was Abu Mayanja, as you know, Muslim. And I thought, wow, this is quite interesting. And he was a very, very interesting boss. We worked together very well. And eventually he left me. Now, at every point I thought I was going to leave, God made sure he shepherded me. So the same Solicitor General one day called me and said, we had somebody working for us at State House who is leaving, and now I'm going to send you there. And I said, no, sir, I'm not going. And he said, but I thought you were Mlokole. Why don't you first pray about it? He said, how can you give me an answer before you pray about it? And I repented right there. I said, okay, let me go and pray about it. So I approached my wife and we prayed about it. And the reason I didn't want to go to State House was I was feeling insufficient as a lawyer because they said I was going to be advising the president on legal matters. I was feeling very, very insufficient. You would feel insufficient with any president. Now, this particular president, I felt like, no, I cannot. But after months of praying about it, and with my wife, we prayed. We felt like the Lord opened and said, you can go. And I was supposed to be there for 3 years. Yes, let's give the Lord a hand clap because it's one of those moments when the Lord takes over. You know that you are really insufficient. And I wasn't feigning, trying to appear weak when I'm strong. I felt really insufficient to be able to advise the president on legal matters. But the Bible says when we are weak, then we are strong. Because it is in our weakness that he works. So I was supposed to work there for 3 years. I ended up working at State House for 7 years. Now, I know some of you have worked there. You have people who have worked at State House. It's not a very easy place to work in because of many, many factors. But one of them is you are advising the president. The president, I think, knows everything. And it's as if you are on the test. What are you going to tell him? And what angle are you putting on it and that kind of thing. But 7 years, and I left, and I believe I left a good record in that place. But one thing that continued keeping me there was the fact that I knew I was insufficient, and I knew law is not like mathematics. You know, if you are advising the president on math, 1 + 1 = 2. Now law can have very many interpretations and so on. So you always know. So I had to rely on the wisdom of the Lord. But one of the things that helped me is I had a Bible in my drawer at State House in the office. And every morning, in addition to being the first person in the office, I said, Lord, there are some things I can do. One of them is to keep time. I'll be the first person. And as soon as I arrive, I'll read my Bible and so on, and get wisdom, download wisdom. Now, my office mate was somebody called Honorable Fox Odoy. Some of you know him, some of you have heard about him. He was my office mate for many years. Very nice chap. We got along quite well. Now, one day they were swearing in judges at State House. As happens, they could not find a Bible. You know, what is likely to go wrong can go wrong. So everything was there, but the Bible for the judges to hold. Then folks said, I know where I can get a Bible. I know where I can get a Bible. And he immediately ran to my drawer and got my Bible, and they saw. I mean, it sounds like a small thing, but it is a big thing that the people around you know that you have something there, a secret weapon which you are always checking on. Anyway, long story short, I eventually had to go back to Attorney General's chambers. But at the time I went back, we had something called Uganda Christian Lawyers Fraternity. Try to bring together Christian lawyers to fight all these battles that you've been talking about, because you need fellowship. You need fellowships like this to be able to support each other and help each other and encourage. So people would call me. People who needed lawyers would say, I want a Christian lawyer, I want this and the other, and so on. And so when I was back in Attorney General's, the people at Revenue Authority called me and said they wanted a lawyer. The place had fallen vacant and they needed a lawyer. But at this time, I was beginning to find, coming from working for the president, to come back to work in the ministry was becoming very, very difficult. One, everybody's looking at you suspiciously. They think you're a spy. You are spying on them. So they are going to make your work much, much more difficult. But for me, what informed my decision that I think it's time to leave, when I worked at State House, I could get a call, a phone, and call the Vice President, the Prime Minister, the Chief Justice, anybody to solve a problem. Now, in the ministry, those of you who work in ministries, you know bureaucracy. It's only a PS who can call a PS, only a minister can call a minister. So I had a problem on my desk, which was to go to court the following day. And the Minister of Internal Affairs was Ndugu Rugunda, who, as you all know, he's very easy to reach, and we knew each other. So I got my phone from Minister of Justice. I called Ndugu. I said, you know, we have this and the other, can we? And then we managed to get the information. Now, when my superiors heard that I had called a minister, they almost fainted. They thought, no, this cannot be allowed. How can a junior officer? Anyway, I realized if I'm to be efficient, really I cannot continue working in this environment. So I knew it was time for me to move on. But I still was waiting on the Lord. So URA asked for a legal officer. And I gave them names, but I said, what kind of level of job is that? And of course, if you are listening to Jennifer Musi tell this story, she tells it different. She says she asked me for a recommendation, and I recommended myself. But don't believe her, that's not what happened. Anyway, long story short, I ended up at URA, and I left government. Now, I left government when I was left with 1 year to earn pension. And I had to travail. Should I leave my pension, or should I sit through 1 year of a lot of difficulty, hardship, and, and eventually I said, pension, what is pension? I decided to forego all that, and I went to start a new life in Revenue Authority. Start afresh completely. But I was a happier person. I've never been happier in a workplace than I was at URA. Jolie is here, we worked with her, and many under Allen. That was the best work environment I think one can ever ask for. I always woke up in the morning raring to go. I wanted to go and work. I felt fulfilled. I felt I was contributing. So all the pain was completely rubbed out. Now, one of the things that you learn, and that we learn from Joseph, who I will come to shortly, is that it is not about me, it's not about you. We are doing the Lord's calling, the Lord's bidding, and the Lord deploys us at a particular time. If it was about me and enjoying what I was doing, of course I would have continued working in URA. I would have, I always tell Alan that I can go to UNRA and be an executive assistant. As I was in URA, then we would work together properly. But the Lord has his own timing and his seasons, as you have mentioned. And while I was still in the midst of enjoying my work, I was called and I was appointed a judge. I resisted this appointment because I thought, no, I'm not interested. I don't want to become a judge. I'm too young, and that is not what I want. But the late Hilda Musubira was my referee. She was a PPS at the time I left State House. So I went to her and I said, they have called me for this, but I'm really not interested. And she gave me the word of wisdom, and said, if they have called you, the least you can do is you go for the interview, and then we can take it up from there. Anyway, long story short, I was appointed a judge of the High Court. I went and worked in Masaka. Again, just as I was settling in Masaka, they transferred me to Fort Portal. Now, Fort Portal is where my wife comes from. And I told the principal judge, how can I go and be a judge of Maibako? It will be very difficult. And he told me, you took oath to do justice to all manner of people without fear, favor, ill will, or affection. So wherever we send you, please just go. Now I can tell you, I told my wife that I think I will retire here in Fort Portal. I'm enjoying my work so much. Let me retire here. But again, you cannot retire before the Lord has said it is time. Yeah, so while I was still enjoying Fort Portal, they called me back to headquarters, and I was posted to Land Division as a deputy head, where I worked for about 6 months. And we got some information that they were considering me for the office of Director Public Prosecution. And I shared it with my wife, who is more of a prayer warrior than I. And she also, without praying about it, said, no, you cannot do that job. So I went back to the people who were talking to me, and I said, no, we cannot do that job. And they also advised me to pray about it. So 1 year later, my wife came and said, I think I'm now at peace. You can say that job, if it is still available, it can be done. And I went back, and I became Director of Public Prosecutions. Now, I always tell people that if I had known half of what the job entailed, actually I would never have taken it. I think it's the most difficult job I've had to do. It might be one of the most difficult jobs in the country, actually, because it involves fighting crime. For us to be here peacefully and all, and the roads and everything to run on peacefully, the Director of Public Prosecution must be on top of the game. There is a lot of crime that goes on. There are a lot of people who want to commit crimes, who want to reap where they did not sow, who want to disrupt, who want to cause mayhem. And that office and other offices, cyber, this and the other, they are very, very instrumental in ensuring that we all live in peace and quiet. And my predecessor had worked in that office for 15 years. And I told the Lord, there is no way I'm going to work here for 15 years without being disobedient, but please, Lord, let's make this a little shorter for me. But as I mentioned, there are always fellowships and places where you can get help. Before I was appointed a judge, I attended something called Institute for National Transformation, something put on by Dr. Magara, among other people. I found this very, very helpful for me as I was going to take on the office of judge, to ensure that I had no excuses as a leader and I was a representative of the Lord in whatever I was doing. So when I go to Masaka, I took charge of my court and I made sure I produced my judgments on time. I typed them out myself, and on the day I was reading them, I was circulating them to the lawyers. They did not have to wait a day. I wanted to do the best, to be the best that the Lord could get out of me. The other thing I attended is something called Leadership Renewal Retreat, something put on between Bishop Orombi and Bishop Joshua Rere. It takes place in Jinja. It's a very, very helpful place for meeting other leaders, retreating and praying. And that's where I met Bishop Rere, who introduced me to the prayer altar. And my background denominationally is between Anglican and Baptist. The thing these two have in common is we don't go too much into anointing oil and so on. Now, Bishop Rere told me he was coming to anoint my office and all. And so I spent the day before praying and saying, Lord, what is this going to happen to me? But I had trusted Bishop Rere and Bishop Orombi. I knew whatever they were going to do was for good. So Bishop Rere brought a whole army, and for the first time in my life, I was anointed with oil. My chair, my seat, my doors, and all. And eventually, I embraced that area of worship. And I said, these are my brothers, and they wish me well. And as I mentioned, this prayer altar really took me through, because the life of a DPP is a very difficult life. I hope you take some time off to pray for our sister Jane. It's a very difficult office. Two incidents I will share with you about that office is one day they brought me a letter from Director CID and said, we have credible information. There are people out to take you out. They are looking to kill you, and therefore you must take some measures. So I said, but why would anybody want to kill me? What have I done? And the answer was, it's not that you have done anything wrong. To the contrary, you are disrupting the plans of the evil one, and that is enough to earn you a death sentence. And so I realized I had to rely on prayer, and I had to, in a way, surrender my life and know that my life is not my own. I'm really serving, and at the leisure of the Lord, he would take it away. The second thing, I learned in the office that when the time for doing the work was time, I had to do the work. I always was first in office, and this is one thing I can pass on, because this one is under your control. In life, there are things within your control and those without. One thing in your control is time. You can decide when you wake up, when you reach office, and you'll be better off. So, as a result, at 10 p.m., I would turn my phone to silent so that whatever was happening now, in any case, no courts open after 10. So there was nothing I could do at that time. So now you remember the incident of stoning the president's vehicle in Arua. Yeah, I was deep asleep. So when I woke up at 5, I found around 100 missed calls and messages and everybody running around and so on. But because I had slept and the thing had happened, when I woke up, I was fresh and I could handle this matter now. I had prayed to the Lord and waited on him. Now I was fresh to handle the matter. And we were able to handle it the way we handled it, and all it threatened to take us down. But again, the Lord was in control. So one day, 6 years into this office, now I always tell people that the office I've worked longest in my nomadic life actually turns out to be State House, where I worked 7 years. I've not worked anywhere else longer than that. So I was seeing myself breaking my record in the office of DPP. And I said, okay, now 6th year and a few months, somebody brings to my attention the advert for Supreme Court judge. Now you have to understand that there is High Court, then Court of Appeal, then Supreme Court. You don't jump from High Court where I was at the level of High Court. You don't jump and go to Supreme Court. So I said, no, I don't think this one is my level. I will be jumping a class. And the person said, well, but the requirements of the Constitution, you make the errors and so on. In any case, the worst that can happen, is no. So I prayed about it and all. Short story, long story short, 3 months after I had made the application, they shortlisted me. I went for the interview, and I was appointed a Justice of the Supreme Court in February 2020, and I moved. You see, God is in control. He's the, what does it say? He's the mighty controller, blessed controller of all things. Just when I thought I was going to stay in the office of DPP for many, many years, something happened and I moved, because it is the Lord who deploys us. He deploys, and his timing is the best, and he decides on the timing. The thing you need to do is do your best at the time where he has placed you, and then he will take care of the rest of the things. And this is the lesson, and that's where I'm still at the Supreme Court. I started 2020. I'm now in my my third year. And justice is about judgments and wisdom to give these judgments. They are always... I was given to talk on, in a few minutes, it is not me, God is the answer, Genesis 41:16. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is not in me, God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. In another version it says, it is beyond my power to do this. Joseph replied, but God can tell you what it means, and he will set you at ease. I believe there were 3 stages in Joseph's life. Before captivity, when he was a young man living with his family, enjoying, the usual sibling rivalry and all. And then there is the stage when Joseph, the brothers turned against him. And they all agreed that this Joseph is a dangerous man. He's trying to put himself above us, and we need to get rid of him. All of them conspired. And he found himself in a dungeon. And also this time, it's the same stage as the time when he found himself in prison. It's the time of captivity. That's the second phase. The third phase, of course, is after captivity. So we can talk about before, during, after. In all our lives, I think we have a before, during, and after. And the before is the formative stage when we are still trying to grow and maybe finding the Lord, and we are protected by family, by friends. We are really, really learning. And then we come to the next phase, when we are thrown into the theater of action. Stuff begins to happen to us. Joseph, I don't know at what point he realized that I think he had a calling of God on him. It must have been around, because how can all your brothers turn against you really for not doing anything wrong? And then you are sold. And then you are thrown in a dungeon. And then you don't die in the dungeon. And then you go into this household and you become a houseboy. And then the lady of the house wants to grab you. And then the husband does not ask for you to be executed. He just says, take you. At what point did Joseph realize that I think there is some calling of God on my life? The way this is not the normal way things happen. And I think we also need to reach a point in our life, in our work, when we should realize that I think God is protecting us, is setting us up, is calling us in a certain direction. Because if it wasn't for that, we would die in a dungeon, we would be executed when we are falsely accused. People falsely accuse others, and that is a very important time for us in the formation, in the growth of the Lord. And it is during this time, I would want to tell you that Joseph could come out at the end and say, it is not me, it is the Lord. You need that time in the dungeon, in the prison, in exile. David needed to be in the lion's den and the blazing furnace to be able to realize that It can't be me. If it was just me, the fire would have consumed me, the lions would have eaten me, I would have died in the jail. That wait comes to an end, and eventually it gives way to freedom. But before the freedom, and of course we all like the time of freedom, when we are able to do whatever, become prime minister, or like David, to be like Daniel, for the king to say, everybody in the kingdom must worship the God of Daniel. But to reach that point, you must go through. The joke is talked about Jacob Zuma, when he was president of South Africa, that he reached out to the people and told them that I am your new Mandela. I'm the Mandela, so please treat me like that. And one young man said, in order to be the Mandela, first go to prison for 27 years. And then when you come, we'll proclaim you. To be the Mandela, you needed to serve 27 years on Robben Islands, because that was a time that prepared you in the crucible. And to be the Joseph, to be able to say, it is not me, it is the Lord. You needed some time in the dungeon. You needed to be betrayed by your brothers. You needed to be in prison for those years. And you needed to interpret the dream for the cupbearer and the baker. This time, I think he had told them, I can interpret this dream. I think he did not tell them about the Lord. He did it, and they said, we'll remember you before our boss. He waited another 2 years, and nothing happened. So human beings, they have their limits. Don't put all your trust in them. Put trust in them, but put trust in God first and foremost. And the example of Joseph and the cupbearer and the baker are very, very good illustrations of this. He interpreted their dreams. Indeed, one of them was promoted. But when they went out, they forgot. And it is human. You don't want now to be burdened by somebody else's baggage. You have your own. Why are you now bringing other people in the picture and so on? You have to speak for yourself. It is human to be selfish and all. So we put our trust in humans at our own risk. There are humans who we can trust, we should trust, but first and foremost, we need to put our trust in the Lord. The lessons from Joseph so far, and I always tell people that I used to read that no good deed will go unpunished. And I thought it was a joke. When you grow up, you realize that actually good deeds can get punished. For doing good, people will hate you. People actually will try to eliminate you, to punish you, to demote you for doing good. Don't do good because you think that it will be rewarded. Do good because that is what is expected of you. That's what the Lord expects of you. If a reward comes, well and good. The other lesson from Joseph is we still have the three: money, sex, and power. They are still to be used by the devil, manipulated, and you always have to be on the lookout, especially in the offices that you work. And of course, having worked as DPP and now being in the justice system, taking from the example of Joseph, you realize that not all the people in prison are guilty of offenses. Not just in Joseph's time, but even today. And that not all those who are out of prison are innocent people. So it can be the prison. For Jonah, it was the belly of a fish. For Daniel, it was the lion's den and the blazing furnace. For others, it was exile. God uses different methods. And he uses different periods. For Jonah, it was 3 days. How many days was Joseph in the dungeon and in the prison? Different times. God has all of it at his, and depending on what he wants to get out of you, he will use either 1 day or he could use 10 years. I think the important thing is learn the lessons quickly, then the prison term will be shorter. And the other lesson so far is human beings will forget you. but God remembers. Just wait for his timing. So Wilson Bugembe sang the song, which is very popular. Bwalikujukira. When you are in prison, the Lord remembers. It's not that he will remember you. The Lord always remembers, but he will wait for his time to do it. Wait for your appointed time, and at the right time, he will do it. Meanwhile, keep on keeping on and doing the right thing. The situation in Egypt during the time of Joseph just shows that there are always two forces. You know, and I think Apostle Batamze you mentioned, there are always two forces. And he mentioned the church going this way, and we are in the world, but not of the world. Those are the forces I'm telling you. The forces of the world are completely different, and they are working on a different, under different command. And they are in contradiction with the forces of good, with the spiritual. And every so often, they will clash. That's why he was praying against their altars, because they are always setting up altars also to try and advance. The two kingdoms of good and evil, and Joseph went right in there representing good, and Potiphar's wife, I think, was representing the other forces. And when Joseph least expected it, Potiphar's wife struck. I ask you, young men, especially here, if you had been Joseph, the wife of the boss propositions you. I mean, you would look at the opportunities when you have the boss's wife at your beck and call. Things can only be good for you in the household. But that is the short-term view. That is the short-sighted view of things. Which kingdom would prevail in Joseph's life and in Egypt? And as you could see, there was no room for neutrality with Potiphar's wife. It was either on this side or on this side, and Joseph decided to flee. For a man to be fleeing from a woman, it can only be God who he's focusing on. Otherwise, humanly speaking, that is not the picture that... and you know what the mission of Joseph was. Joseph was to come and help the children of Israel be saved from hunger and famine, and eventually go to the promised land. I found that, you know the saying, something hanging by a thread? The time Potiphar was propositioning Joseph, God's project was hanging by a thread. If Joseph succumbed, that project with Joseph involved would have come crashing down. But many times, God is deploying us, and his projects in this world, his kingdom, sometimes you need to know that it is hanging by your thread, and it is you to make or break. It's not that it will fail, he will find somebody else, but are you going to vindicate the situation? What would have happened if Joseph had succumbed? He would have had a fling with Mrs. Potiphar, but definitely it would have been short-lived. And he would still have ended up in prison. Actually, he would have been lucky to end up in prison alive this time. I think this time Potiphar would have had reason to cut off his head. In fact, somebody opined that the reason Potiphar did not take the wife too seriously and just sent Joseph to prison is maybe because Mrs. Potiphar had this, should we call it a weakness, and Potiphar knew about it. So he must have said, this young man, I think, just go to prison and let us continue. But of course, if something had happened, Joseph's head would have ended up. But he ended up in prison, but with his head held high. And in prison, yes, but temporarily. In prison, yes, but for his own protection from Mrs. Potiphar. Can you imagine if they had not taken him to prison and he was still hanging around Mrs. Potiphar, seeing him that you did this and all? Who do you think you are? And so on. For his own protection, he ended up in prison. In prison, yes, but for a short while, and I think for time, for him to commune with God and find out, why am I getting all these misfortunes? Why do my brothers turn against me? Why do they throw me in a dungeon? Why do they sell me? Why am I now in prison? I have been trying to put on my behavior. Those are questions you need to struggle with and ask God, and God will give you the answers. And he was asking these questions in prison. They didn't tell us in detail what he was doing in prison, what his day is like, but we can imagine he was travailing and wondering, why? Why is misfortune following me? Why all this one thing after another? And he must have come to the conclusion that, God, I think you are in this. Otherwise, I would not have survived. Yes, indeed, God's Israel project was still on track. Lessons for leaders from Joseph. Number one, God is in control. How many of you feel like you are in a dungeon, in prison, in exile, at wherever you are? Anybody? Okay, I see some hands. Yes. When you are in that place, you feel like, no, the evil forces are winning. Everything is going wrong. Nothing seems to be going right. Just a reminder for you, God is in control. He's the blessed controller of all things. Just spend the time looking at him, looking to him, fellowshipping and consulting with elders. Second lesson is flee from evil. And fleeing from evil will not necessarily set you free from suffering. Actually, fleeing from evil may bring you suffering. But it is okay. It is okay. Joseph, I said flee from evil. Fleeing from evil will not necessarily bring you blessings immediately and all. In fact, you may suffer for fleeing from evil, for doing the right thing. You may suffer, but it is well. It is okay. This is the kind of suffering you should enjoy. You should be glad to partake. We need to welcome Pastor Patience. Pastor Patience. You're welcome. Glad to be here. We've been generously welcome, and we feel at home. Thank you. So lessons, we are trying to see lessons for leaders from Joseph. God is in control, is the blessed control of all things. Flee from evil. You may suffer from it, but it is okay, it is well. I don't know how many of you have heard about somebody called Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Germany. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, please get a hold of a book or Google him. Very, very illustrious career. I think got a PhD at 25 years. Basically wrote a book. What is the title of the book? Okay, The Cost of Discipleship. This is a book you need to get hold of it. The Cost of Discipleship. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, German. Executed at a very young age, I think at 33 also. But fiercely evangelistic and preaching the gospel. One statement he made in The Cost of Discipleship, which could summarize up the title of the book. He says, when Christ calls a man, he bids him to come and die. Are you scared? When Christ calls a man, he bids him come and die. The cost of discipleship ultimately can be death. And Joseph came very, very close. Very, very close. But do not fret, God's timing is best. The other lesson, when you finally get audience with the king, and that is the subtitle of our message. Are you able to say, it is not I, it is the Lord who will give you the answer? Now, I think I read somewhere that when Pharaoh called for Joseph, they shaved his hair and all, they tidied him up to be presentable for the king. And then the king said, interpret for me this dream. Now, how many of us, if we were before the king, would not say, Potiphar's wife accused me wrongly and I've been suffering in prison. That woman is wicked. I interpreted the dream for your baker and your cupbearer, and they left me to languish. Did they ever tell you about me? Humanly, I think you would want to empty yourself before the king and tell him all your grievances. But remember, Apostle Batamze told us, Joseph said, you have taken away the pain of my past and transgressions that have been visited upon me by my brothers and by everybody else. I think as a leader, you need to always empty your heart of bitterness, of resentment, of anger. You should be able to forgive. By the time Joseph came before the king, these were not things that were preoccupying his mind. They were bygones. And he was ready to tell Pharaoh, it is not me, it is the Lord. He just went straight to the point. He did not beat about the bush, bring his personal agenda. He just said, the Lord will tell you what the dream is about, and it will bring ease to you. The other lesson is, before a king, you need to say little. Say only what is important. And you should be able to say, it is not I, it is God. Because we have laid the basis and the foundation to get to this point, that Joseph really, if it was his effort, if he was an ordinary human being deployed by himself or by his parents and all, he would not have reached this place alive at this point. He would have perished, he would have been beheaded, he would have given up. He would even have run mad. But the fact he knew during those years in prison that he was a special person, a special child of God on a mission. And therefore, when he met Pharaoh, he said, not I, not I, because I died. I died many times before this point. Only the Lord lives through me. So we must die to self. I'm concluding. Our daily struggle is not against flesh and blood. There is a verse to that effect. But I want to add, in addition to principalities and all, that it is not actually against Potiphar's wife. It is not against the baker and the cupbearer. It's not against your minister, your permanent secretary, your commissioner. In heavenly realm, it does represent certain powers, but your struggle has been upgraded. It's not against those people. Indeed, your daily struggle is first and foremost against yourself. You should be able to die and say, it is not I. It is God. So the daily struggle is against yourself. It's against your ego, it's against your pride, it's against your self-importance, it's against your complex superiority or inferiority, both equally bad. It's against what we used to call as Bazukufu, the old man, the Adam, the fallen nature. It took Joseph years in prison and some days in the dungeon to finally say, Pharaoh, look, it's not me, it is God. We should be able to reach a point when we give all the glory to the Lord God. Thank you very much for your attention. God bless.